I'm Justin, and today we have the benefit of having Erin join us. I've talked a bit about her in some of my videos, but she's joined us today, and we're going to talk a little bit about employee engagement at a bit of a deeper level. So, Erin, I've shared a bit about you on my channel here, but I never can really do it justice. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you're up to?
I work primarily with developing managers. That's where I spend the majority of my time. And one of the tools I use to help develop those managers is Clifton Strengths, or often known as Strengths Finder. It's an assessment that maps people's natural approach to things because leadership is very individualized, and it's a fantastic tool to be able to open up that dialogue and to create understanding and awareness around how you and the people that work for you approach things.
Awesome. So let's talk specifically about engagement. Why is it so important? Why does it matter? And what have you seen in your experience with when it comes to engagement?
Engagement is the linchpin of like the main metric, in my opinion. And well, it's not even my opinion. There's so much rich data to support this, but it's the cornerstone of success for a business. And you can tie engagement to productivity levels, which then ultimately is what's hitting the bottom line. So engagement is all about, is someone, it's a spectrum of, is when someone's coming into work, are they excited to work? Are they looking around the corner? Are they doing everything possible to be successful? Or are they, what became popular on TikTok with quiet quitting, is actually just disengagement, where you come in, do the bare minimum, just kind of fly under the radar. You're not really pushing things. That's disengagement. And then there's active disengagement. And that's where you really don't want to be, which is people who are coming in and costing companies sometimes millions and billions of dollars because they're not speaking up when they see problems, and or sometimes even creating problems on purpose.
Got it. So one of the components that Gallup talks about in their surveys on engagement, I've talked a little bit about, I know what's expected of me in my role. I have the tools and resources to do my job. But there's a third really important one, and it is that I have the opportunity to do what I'm great at work every day or frequently. So talk about that question and kind of how Gallup's strengths and maybe even the top 34 report plays into tying people in, aligning people with what they're great at work.
Yeah, so a huge part of engagement, like you said, is making sure that you are aligned. Your strengths or your natural approach to things are aligned with the job that you're doing. So one of the things that I love to do is relate it to writing with your dominant hand versus your non-dominant hand. If you write with your non-dominant hand, it's going to be messy. It takes time. It's hard to do. You'll never be naturally good at it the way you will be with your dominant hand. And so people can perform in any role for an extended period of time, but are they thriving in that role? Are they burnt out very easily? Those are things you want to look at. And so when you meet someone, it's hard to sometimes understand, are they naturally a fit for this role or not? And so strengths gives you this kind of shortcut into it because you're looking at not only this rich set of data of the, so the report shows, takes 34 different strengths and ranks them from 1 to 34. And what's really cool about it is you have a chance of, it's 1 in 5 billion of getting the same 34 report as someone else in the exact same order. So it's unlikely you'll find someone else on the planet with your same neural wiring in your brain. And so once you have that data, you can see where people are more successful. So for example, I worked with someone in sales, and when I looked at her report, it became very clear to me that she was more of a natural fit in more of an operations behind the scenes type role than a customer facing role based on her strengths profile. And so she actually made a lateral transition in her company. She wasn't happy in her job. Her team actually wasn't happy with her. She made that lateral transition into operations, and then within 1 year became a VP and has continued to just move up because she's now thriving in a role that aligns with her strengths.
Very cool. I actually remember that example. But as a leader in an organization, when I think about suddenly figuring out what everybody's great at, one of my fears, and I think you've heard me say this, is all of a sudden I'm going to figure out that everybody's in the wrong role and I need to overhaul the whole organization based on their strengths. Maybe talk about why that is or isn't true, and what you actually find when you go through this exercise.
So when people get these reports back, I see all the time where someone is fearful of their results. Like, should I have to terminate someone? Am I going to get terminated? And that's not this at all. Um, I go back to anyone can perform in any role at any given time. It's just whether or not they are going to be able to thrive in the role. They're going to get burnt out easily. They're happy at the end of the day. Like, are you going home and saying, I had a really great day today. I'm fulfilled with what I'm doing. That's where things start to shift. And so, and when you're looking at a full 34 report, going back to it's 1 in 5 billion of getting the same answers or same order as someone else. So therefore, you can't define specific strengths around a role. So let's say you're hiring an account manager. You can't say, I need these 5 specific strengths for this role, just because statistically, you're not going to find that. And so you can get groupings, but what all it should do, and this is true for any assessment, you should never live and die by any one assessment because it can be changed, people can fake it, all kinds of things. It's only meant to start a conversation. So it should just be a jumping off point to have a conversation with your team members if you're a manager, saying, are you happy? Are you fulfilled in this role? Do you feel burnt out? That's where this should lead to, not in this, we got to take this assessment and then make these very like hard decisions from there. Do not do that.
You do find sometimes, though, that there are leanings towards certain strengths in different roles. Sales, for example. Maybe talk a little bit about why that is, or what you see when it comes to that.
Yeah, so this is true also for the type of company, like size of company, maintenance company versus growth company, their leanings. So for sales, for example, it's a customer facing role. You're talking to a human every single day, all day long, different people all day long. Whereas account management, you're talking to people, but it's typically people that you can build a relationship with over time. Not always, but that's typically what it's like. And so for me, someone like me, I originally did cold call sales a long time ago in college and absolutely hated it. And it's because my strengths are designed to build a long-term relationship with people. And so I actually was burned out very quickly by talking to people, new people all the time, and getting the phone slammed on me. Just people just saying no. That's I took it personally, because I have high relationship building skills, whereas typically people I see in sales have high influencing. So influencing is a category talking to strangers. Those are the people you put at the front desk of a hotel in customer service, and any type of that customer facing role where it's newness. They thrive. Those people thrive by meeting new people, and it's really fun to watch that happen. Whereas I'm not that way at all. I'm the opposite. So those categories are where you start seeing those leanings in sales influencing. Um, Whereas if you have like an strategic development group, you might see more strategy come through.
Got it. So you and I have had some pretty unique experiences because, or opportunities even, where you were able to come into some of my organizations and really make a huge impact with the strengths program. So maybe share a little bit about some experiences, some examples, even ones that you were able to coach me on that show kind of the power of strengths in an organization.
So going back to this is and we are all individuals. One of the big mistakes that people make is they try to copy and paste leadership principles from somebody else. So how someone else operates, and we're unique, that 1 in 5 billion. So we have to figure out what works best with us and with our direct manager at the time. And so what I love doing is, because I know you so well as well, going in and working with your teams and saying, okay, here's how best to work with Justin. Here's how Justin's profile. And so I remember talking to someone that reported to you, and they were struggling with the fact that it always felt like things were trying to get improved. That anytime they presented something to you, it was like, well, what can we do to make it better? And this person wasn't sure where that was coming from. And I was able to show this person that you have maximizer. So this person was frustrated with feeling like nothing was ever good enough. And I was able to show that you have a strength of maximizer. And that strength is all about looking your brain's like a metal detector for how can things be improved. And so that's what you were doing. You were looking in those conversations to say this is how it needs to be improved. And all it changed in that moment was an unlock for this person, but also a conversation with you to say, hey, maybe provide the context to your team that this is how that you operate. This has nothing to do with you being critical of the work that they're doing. And creates awareness for you to say you need to provide affirmation of their work that they're doing before you jump into what can be improved. And I have maximizer and developer as well. So I'm like ultimately like the ultimate critical person. So I have to be careful with this too.
Yeah. Why don't you share a few of your strengths and kind of how you see that impact you and what awareness you have around those?
So my top 5 strengths are individualization is number 1, number 2 is relator, number 3 is strategic, number 4 is developer, and number 5 is arranger. So for those of you that don't know strengths, that may not mean much to you, but individualization is all about looking at each person as a unique individual. I want to get to know your favorite coffee order. Like I would love for the Starbucks app to be able for me to be able to go in and have friends and see what my best friend recently ordered. So if I show up at her house, I can show up with her favorite coffee that she just ordered. That would be incredible for me. Number 2 is relator. Relator is that opposite. I was saying about I want to build long-term relationships. I have a very close inner circle. I don't trust easily, and very few people make it into that circle. And so, as a manager and as someone that was in HR and house, I have to override that and get to know people really quickly because I can come across as standoffish because I'm actually pretty shy because of that relator mechanism. But it does allow me to build long-term, very deep relationships. Number 3 is strategic, and that is in the strategic thinking category. And it's all about being able to make connections. And I know you have the strength too, Justin. We're able to make connections where other people don't. And Justin actually will tell me all the time, hey, yeah, I think I missed the huddle here because I'm 10 steps ahead in my brain and I have to back up and explain things. But overall, it allows me to piece out how things are connected in the map, the road we should take. Developer, I think, is probably the biggest influence in what I do for my job is I love developing people. So just like that maximizer, I'm always looking at where are people's gaps and how to improve them. I'm a natural teacher. You'll hear me talk about analogies all the time. A lot of developers use analogies when they teach, and I love to develop. So going back to, are you satisfied? I am not satisfied if I don't have a day where I don't get to help develop someone. And I get the most excited coming out of my office when I have time to develop people. And then lastly is a ranger. And a ranger is not, for those of you that have a ranger, or it's not about being organized necessarily. I can be the messiest person ever, but I like things stored. For me, I'm an arranger of people. I'm a conductor of people. So I love an org chart conversation. I start with that with anyone I'm working with. I want to know where everything kind of fits and has a label in my brain. It's not necessarily about organization. I'm looking, I have a stack of 20 books on my desk that are not organized at all. But so for me, that's how it shows up.
And what you've shared there about you're an arranger of people versus an arranger of things and et cetera. I think this is one of the reasons, right, that with 34 strengths, there's plenty of calculations and permutations that'll share exactly what it could be. But when you take the 34, each one has an impact on the other. And so whereas yours stack together in a certain profile, you end up more a ranger of people where others might be a ranger of things or something else, right?
Correct. Like that's what's so cool. So the if you were to purchase this, there's two options. There's a 19.99 option and then a 49.99 option. The 19.99 is just going to give you your top 5 and it's going to come with what's called a 1.0 definition. So both of our strategic definitions are going to look exactly the same. But if you're able to upgrade to the full 34 report, you're going to get what's called a 2.0 definition. And that definition is going to be influenced by your other strengths. So if you were to read my arranger, you're going to see some of those other strengths around mine pulling through. And that's really cool because it is my arranger is very different from most people's that I read. Their arrangers are processes and they don't care at all about an org chart where it's where I start in a conversation. So really talk about individualization. I highly recommend the full 34 because you really get to know your people on a much deeper level that way. And it also provides you blind spots, which is a great, it's like a on a platter development areas for your team and for yourself.
And while this may seem like a sales pitch, just to be clear, neither of us are paid anything
No,
ever for the purchase of
no,
a $49, or $19 product.
no. Gallup, we've asked actually, and Gallup said, no, no deal. We don't do that.
We're good on our own.
Yeah.
Um, so you find that people like let me put it this way: you don't generally run into a whole lot of situations where people are just completely in the wrong role because those strengths do kind of navigate people, or people end up choosing careers that align with areas they're passionate about. I mean, it does happen. Obviously, you've seen it happen. But take sales, for example. What are some of the strengths that you see in sales quite frequently, and why do you think people are in that sales role?
So in terms of like specific strengths, and not the domain of influencing, the most common two that I see and sales is a broad topic. So there's cold call sales, there's enterprise sales, there's a bunch of different caveats when it comes to sales. And the type of profile for enterprise looks a lot more like account management than um, an outbound team. So speaking mostly to outbound, because that's probably the biggest swath of sales individuals, the top two strengths I see are woo, which is winning others over. That's an influencing theme. They're like the social butterflies in a room. They love to network. They love meeting new people, winning them over, and then moving on to the next person. That's sales, and competition. So competition is about being first, and they get so much joy and fulfillment out of winning that deal of being first. They're the people that love to see the screen on the sales floor that shows the ranking of who's doing what, and they're very highly motivated by money, not in a bad way. People think that sometimes that's a bad thing, and it's not. It's actually great, when done the right way. So they're highly motivated by those sales quotas and those goals, or those spiffs, those competitions, and being best.
So we obviously agree that strengths is an amazingly useful tool, but there are those that say, "Oh, cool, strengths. That's a lot like Myers Briggs, or that's a lot like Enneagram." What do you say to that, and how do you compare those thoughts and those programs to strengths?
So there are two big things to think about when you're thinking about these assessments. Number one, don't, like I said before, don't live and die by an assessment. Do not ever make performance decisions, evaluations, termination decisions ever based on this. And you don't want to ever weaponize any assessment you do, or you're going to kill trust with your team. So it's got to be just a jumping off point with your team, and that's it. Secondly, you need to look at when you're going to dive into an assessment or use this with your team, you need to look at what it's based on. There are a lot of assessments out there that are based on psychology from the early 1900s, and we know tremendously more about the brain in 2023 than we did in 1912, 1920. And so look at the root, look at the root. Just Google it. What's the root of all of these? And when you look at something like a Myers-Briggs, there's only so many options. DISC, there's only so many options. Yes, there's permutations there, but it can get messy describing those, and you can put people in boxes, and you don't want to do that. So look at the history. Strengths on the history was developed after the MRI was developed. So Don Clifton wanted to look at the development of the brain, and what they thought was the brain was fully developed at 18, and that wasn't true. They found that the brain develops, and we know now that the brain continues to develop all the way to 30 with different parts of the matter of the brain. Main development is 22 for females and 25 to 26 for males, but they were able to actually study the neural wiring of the brain. So in terms of an assessment, strengths is based off of the most recent brain data that we have. And so it's mapping that neural wiring. That's why I chose it.
Amazing explanation. And science aside, I will just share that I have found strengths to be a very approachable, usable on almost a daily basis type of tool. It's very hard for me to say, oh, you know what, because I'm an ENTJ, this is why you're experiencing that maximizer impact when I have one-on-ones with some of the leaders that report to me. Similarly to say, oh, that's just because I'm so red or so blue or yellow, or I'm primarily red and lead with red versus yellow. I mean, that is useful and gimmicky and interesting, and they have their own purpose. But strengths has been something that and I think we've found to be most useful broadly when you're talking about driving engagement in an organization.
Absolutely. And in a workplace for sure. And I mean, I'm an Enneagram 6, and when I first found that out, I was very upset that I was an Enneagram 6 because people it's almost used to be afraid to tell people I'm a 6, and I'm an ENFP with Myers-Briggs, and I'm the campaigner. I don't really know what that means. And I remember telling my old boss that when she asked, and she made a face, a negative face when I told her, and I was like, "What does that mean?" Like, because I'm a like, are you now assessing me because I'm this, I don't want to be put in a box. And so strengths is something when I first chose strengths, I wanted something that was not could be weaponized. It was something that was truly a value add to the organization. And it wasn't this have a training and get excited and then nothing happens with it. I wanted it to be a tool that we could actually use. And at my first company we used it in recruiting, we used it in onboarding, looking at assessing risk, figuring out how to accelerate a manager and a new hire working together. We used it in learning and development. We used it across the board in one-on-ones. There were so many different ways that we could use this. And actually, I just saw recently that company is still using strengths and talking about it, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So every once in a while, a manager will get their report, and there's parts of it. I know that when you do the exercise around the table and share, part of it is asking, highlight the parts that are like, oh man, that's me. And then there's some that they disagree with. What do you say to the areas where managers read it and they go, that's just not me? I mean, what's been your experience with that?
My experience has been once I get into a one-on-one conversation with them, and sometimes even in the training, this will happen. We dig in and it's actually true. They just might have some blind spots around it because someone will say, I actually had this happen recently where someone said, I don't think that's me. And everyone else on the call that knew her goes, that's 100% you. That is absolutely you. And she was like, wait, really? And they started giving her examples of how they see it daily come out. She just had she didn't have awareness that she was even doing it. And so it became this really positive thing where she got all this affirmation from her team, based on that conversation. And I will say, people ask me, well, can your results change? What is it based on your current job? Yes, it can change. It can change. You can try to fake it. You can do all kinds of stuff on this assessment. But for the most part, it doesn't change. So over 6 years, I took it again and I could have sworn taking it, there was no way I was getting the same top five. No way. And my top five stay the same, other 4 and 5 flips, but my 6 through 10 actually radically changed. So our brain's a muscle. It's like a muscle. It changes, it evolves. We have neuroplasticity in our brain, which means it can grow, which is great if we have any type of trauma to our brain. And so, yes, the answer is things can change. Trauma can change our brains. And childbirth is actually considered a trauma. So, moms I've seen who have given birth for the first time after 6 months, their assessment's going to be completely different, which is really cool.
Nice. So if I'm a manager, leader of an organization, I listen to this, I say, okay, I get it. I understand. Where do I start? Like, what is something, I don't necessarily want to set up training for 300 people or, undertake an enormous expense at the moment. What is the first steps? What is something I can do now?
First step is you take it. If you're a manager, you take the assessment. The best way to use this is for you to understand it. So take it, read the report. It's not super intensive. The assessment takes 20 to 30 minutes, depending upon how analytical you are and how much time you spend on questions. It's pairings. I think it's like 144 pairings that you go through, and you can pause it and come back to it. But do it yourself, get to know it, and then have your team do it. So you're looking at a very minimal expense in terms of the assessment costs itself, and you can do so much with it. Again, you'll learn a lot just asking them to walk you through it, to tell you how they view themselves. There's also some great books that you could get. Strengths Based Leadership is the number one book I recommend for managers that will guide you a lot in this. Also, the book It's the Manager, it's a more dense book and it's not meant to be read cover to cover, but it's a great resource. But strengths-based leadership is where I would start, along with taking the assessment. That would be step one.
Awesome. So on the topic of engagement specifically, anything else we haven't covered? Anything else you want to share in terms of thoughts on engagement?
When it comes to engagement, the data is very clear that we do not focus on this worldwide, but especially in the United States, engagement has dropped over the last 2 years and has gone down to 32%. So 32% of the US workforce is engaged. And imagine if we just were able to adjust that slightly, what that would do to overall happiness at work, physical and mental health would increase. We'd have a bigger GDP. There'd be so many things that would be impacted by it. I mean, 32% of people are engaged at work. That's it. And when I meet managers, when I ask them to write their kind of prioritization list, it's usually not even written down. They're focused on their function, and this is a byproduct of it. And what they don't realize, if they would focus on engagement first, the productivity would come. And so I just challenge people to give this a go for 30, 60, 90 days and watch your team completely come alive.
Very, very true. So, you're doing something interesting coming up, focusing on managers that are looking to develop themselves, get more support on the basics. So, why don't you tell us what you're up to next?
Yeah, so this came about from getting an opportunity to connect with people online and realize, okay, if only 32% of team members are engaged, I want to do something about it. And I'm tired of relying on companies to figure this out and actually invest. So I've created Manager Material, and it is a online membership that is incredibly affordable, and we giving you all the ins and outs. This is what I would do if I was in-house HR with you, and it's just all the things that you need to know to set you up for success to be a really awesome manager and help drive that 32% up, because statistically, most managers are likely in that 68% category, not in the 32% category.
So, if you're a leader of an organization or if you're a manager yourself, this is something you should look into. If you're a leader and you have multiple managers in your organization, I'll post the links here in the channel, in the comments below. Check it out. We'll provide links to the community and to Erin's other information. It's definitely something that I recommend for your teams to get engaged with and really up their game. Anything else I missed?
I would just say one more thing. If you're a manager of people and you are going to promote someone into a management position, if you don't use this resource, please at least use some resource. Don't let them drown going out into that is one of the hardest, if not the hardest transition you'll ever make in your career, is going from an individual contributor to a manager. And we have to stop promoting people and just saying, go with God. They need help, they need training, they need a ramp plan, and they need resources. And I'm providing a great way to do it. But if that doesn't work for you, just find something else to do so they have development.
Amazing advice and very, very helpful. Thanks so much for sharing on engagement and strengths. And certainly hope this helps the leaders and managers out there up their game and drive engagement in their organizations. Well, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for joining. If this is information that is meaningful to you, please subscribe, like, so that we know that this is something that you want more of. And we'll see you back here shortly. Thanks again.